This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The persistent aggression by the Israeli entity on the city of Tyre in southern Lebanon has caused enormous destruction for the fourth time in residential and public areas, as well as in all other aspects of life. It also killed many civilians and displaced many others who headed north in search of safety, one of the most basic human rights during war.
This is
the road on the southern coast which connects the city of Tyre with adjacent villages. Destruction is the only way to describe what the Israeli war machine has been doing here for the last 2 weeks, and especially to the road connecting the villages with one another. We tried to go further south on the road, but we were unable to pass beyond the town of Deir Kanun, Ra'a al-Ain, as warplanes flew over our heads bombing the villages. We headed back north and saw an influx of people who have fled their homes.
When the first air raid struck, the woman came out asking for someone to help her. As she was talking to people, 2 or 3 minutes later, there were more air raids. The young man ran away, and then the entire building collapsed.
The city of Tyre was not spared from the Israeli bombardment, which continued today for the 3rd time and completely destroyed a building. Meanwhile, a helicopter targeted an apartment in a building located in the southern district of Tyre. In both cases, the 2 buildings were empty of any residents, but the silence that followed the bombing allowed civil defense forces to carry out their duties. Some searched the 2 areas, while others photographed this painful memory, though the memory did not change the people's resolve in the city.
Israel is an oppressive country. It bombs the children and terrorizes the people. But our faith in God will not be shaken by either Israel or America. We will remain steadfast here, even if we die. This is our country, and we want to stay here. When they invade, we will fight them.
Israel has always been a savage enemy. It targets civilians, but there is no Hezbollah or anybody like that here.
This is what the city of Tyre looks like after it has been destroyed, like its surrounding villages, by Israeli shelling. The road leading to the city is empty of anything except for some cars coming from the villages that have been besieged by Israeli bombardment, which is getting closer and closer to Tyre. Between Tyre and its villages and the Bent Jabal area, this road, which once allowed families to meet safely, is now a death road due to Israeli artillery. No longer can we see anything except for warplanes firing missiles at unarmed civilians. The only thing left is the willpower and resolve of the people, no matter how large the extent of the Israeli assault becomes. Mohammed Garib, Al-Alam, Southern Lebanon.
محمد غريب العالم من على الطريق الذي يصل مدينة صور بقراها جنوب لبنان.
The Israeli war on Lebanon continues in the midst of an overwhelming Arab silence and international paralysis. Meanwhile, the Israeli war machine is causing extensive damage to the country's infrastructure. Tens of thousands of laborers have become unemployed following Israel's concentrated shelling of a number of factories and laboratories, especially in the Baqa province, which is the food basket of Lebanon.
This is yet another sector that incurred extensive losses. It has not spared even its quiet machinery, which has been turned into useless scrap metal. The Bekaa factories were subjected to Israeli airstrikes for several days, just like the families of the workers who have been left with no jobs or food and cannot even provide for their children.
عندنا نحن
We have 331 workers. Currently, they are all unemployed. They all have no choice unless God wills it and we are back in business. You never know.
This is the Dalal factory for construction and prefab homes, though after it was bombed. And this is the Malibom glass factory, also after it's been bombed. This is a textile factory in the Manara area, and that one is for dairy and cheese products near Baalbek. Many factories have been either closed or destroyed. Factories which only days ago were a source of income for hundreds of families and exported products to many of the world's countries. The losses are estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars.
Initially, we had 6 lines. Each line cost about $8 million. So the total loss is no less than $50 million.
Those factories which were not hit by a bomb were hit by a missile, which cut off its distribution route, creating a new problem. Tons of products destined to become spoiled.
Cutting off the roads definitely had an impact on us. Also, we have a severe shortage of workers. Some sectors have almost come to a complete stop.
In any event, the roadblocks will certainly be lifted and the buildings will be rebuilt. But today, they are in a state of silence and anticipation. A few days ago, this factory was full of workers and the hubbub of machines and trucks. However, today there are no workers, machines, trucks, or even factories. All of this has been transformed into nothing.
بسام القادري الجزيرة من منطقة تعنايل البقاع.
The parents of the 2 IDF soldiers abducted by Hezbollah, Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Bregev, met with French Foreign Minister Philippe Douste-Blazy in Paris to appeal to him to do all he can to help secure their son's release. Douste-Blazy said France is operating through every possible channel to win the soldiers' freedom. Malka Goldwasser said that Hezbollah bears responsibility for bringing her son back home alive.
We really do hope that your nation actually can do something to stop this killing, to bring peace to this part of the Middle East, because the Lebanon nation and us could live perfectly nice. We had long friendship in the past. We can do it in the future.
IDF soldier Tomer Weinberg was with Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Bregev when their unit was ambushed by Hezbollah. Weinberg was wounded in the arm and leg in the incident and is recovering at Rambam Hospital in Haifa. He spoke to the press for the first time about the attack, telling reporters that it was a quiet day until their 2 patrol vehicles were caught in the Hezbollah ambush by the northern border. The terrorists shot at the 2 vehicles from both sides. The 2 abducted soldiers were sitting in the same vehicle as Weinberg. All of the soldiers in the second vehicle were killed. The UN Security Council worked late into the night trying to determine the proper language for a resolution concerning the death of 4 UN peacekeepers whose base in southern Lebanon was struck by an Israeli shell, but the Council could not reach a consensus on the proper terminology for the resolution. The French ambassador, who serves as president of the Council, said he personally condemns the action and called for a swift end to the hostilities.
We are concerned about the safety of our peacekeepers in the field because they are sent by the Security Council. Therefore, we have a responsibility to protect them.
We, as France, cannot but condemn this action, which more than ever demonstrated that the fighting must cease urgently.
Joining me now in the studio is veteran diplomat Avi Pasner, former Israeli ambassador in Rome and Paris. Ambassador Pasner, thanks for coming in this evening.
Thank you.
The U.S. managed to avert a Security Council resolution condemning Israel for the airstrike that killed 4 UN workers in Lebanon. Do you feel the patience of the rest of the world with Israel is running out, though?
No, I don't think so. It's true that not everybody is as supportive as the United States is. But if you saw what went on in Rome yesterday during this conference, I think most of the countries of Europe and also the moderate Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, understand very well that we cannot just now say, let's have a ceasefire, call it quit, and go back to the status quo ante, go back to the situation which prevailed until 2 weeks ago. It's not in the rest of anybody to do so. So that they were unable to reach a decision yesterday in Rome, but this unableness enables us to continue to do what we have to do, because we have to push Hezbollah out of our border. And if we couldn't do it in 2 weeks, maybe we'll do it in 3 weeks, or in 4 weeks, or in 5 weeks. We need the time. And what those countries gave us, maybe not, even not willingly, is the time to do what we have to do.
One of the people that we haven't been receiving a great deal of support lately is from UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. He's very quick to condemn Israel. Is he in fact anti-Israel, Kofi Annan?
I don't know. I just may say that his behavior from the beginning of this crisis is very unbalanced, extremely unbalanced. And I think his statement of yesterday that we deliberately hit a UN position is simply scandalous, because he should know better than anybody. We, Israel, who is now ready to accept a UN force in southern Lebanon, why should we hit another UN force? Why should we hit UNIFIL? What's the reason? What's the logic? He knows it. And in spite of that, maybe pressure from some countries, pressure from his entourage, I don't know, issued a statement which is far from the truth. And he knows it, and I believe that we should make our view know about his behavior.
Ambassador Pasner, knowing the French leaders as you do, we've got our families of the kidnapped soldiers now in France trying to appeal to the Lebanese government to help secure the release of the kidnapped soldiers. Knowing these French leaders as you do, how much could this help?
You know, French leaders have a long tradition of helping in humanitarian matters as far as Lebanon, Syria, and Israel are concerned. I remember when I was ambassador to France, it was through French mediation that we got back the 12 bodies of our soldiers from the naval commando, which were ambushed and killed in southern Lebanon. It was through their efforts that we got them back. And they have a long tradition, and I think the families did well to go to France and address themselves to the French president and to the French foreign minister, because they are willing to do something and they are able to do something. And I hope and I pray that they will be successful.
Ambassador Pasner, thanks so much for coming in this evening.
Thank you.
This
afternoon, 2 citizens were martyred, Eid Kulab, 19 years old, and Youssef Ashab, 32 years old. 16 others were injured in an Israeli mortar shell attack on the Sujaiya neighborhood in eastern Gaza. A security source said that Israeli tanks deployed in eastern Gaza repeatedly fired shells at residential homes in the Sheikh area, martyring and wounding many civilians. 5 of the wounded are in critical condition. This afternoon, Ahmed Abu Amshal, 25 years old, was also martyred from the wounds he sustained in an Israeli mortar shell attack on civilian homes in northeast Beit Hanun in the northern Gaza Strip. Kamil al-Najjar, 75 years old, was martyred as a result of a mortar shell bombing in the village of Jabalia. Yesterday evening, it was announced that Azma Ali Okal was martyred from the wounds she sustained earlier. She will be joining her 2 children, Shahed and Mary, who were martyred when their home came under an Israeli mortar shell attack in the Jabalia village. In the past 24 hours, the number of people martyred by the Israeli aggression has increased to 29, and more than 100 others were wounded.
خلال 24 ساعة الماضية جراء العدوان الإسرائيلي إلى 29 مواطنا وأكثر من 100 جريح.
The Palestinian people held a funeral procession for yet several more martyrs who were killed by the escalating Israeli aggression against our people and our lands. The mourners expressed their strong rage and anger towards the Israeli atrocities and crimes. They condemned the international silence, especially the wink and nod policy of the superpowers towards the crimes of Israel.
Hour after hour, no, minute by minute, the number of Palestinian martyrs increases. The number of martyrs in Gaza City in the north has risen to 28 in less than 48 hours. Most of them are women, children, and the elderly. As the Israeli army continues its military campaign east of Gaza City, Palestinians held a funeral procession for the martyrs who were killed by Israeli terrorism.
God willing, we will not let this pass. God willing, we will not let this pass. Especially since the Mujahideen from all the factions, whether Fatah or Hamas or the Popular Front, stand united against this Zionist recklessness, international recklessness, as well as Arab recklessness.
Families in their entirety were exterminated. A mother and her 2 children, one 8 years old, were all martyred. Their sisters sustained critical injuries. Others were also injured by a shell that landed on the home of the Okal family in the Jabalia refugee camp.
There are no words. I swear to God, there are no words that can express the suffering we're going through. They're not only hitting Palestine, they're also hitting Lebanon. We leave our fate to God.
We are pleading with the Arab countries to help the Palestinian people who don't have the capabilities to do anything. They have been killing and shelling homes. They killed a mother and her children who were living in peace. Innocent people and children. Isn't it wrong to bomb them? We leave our fate to God.
Although it is clear to the entire world that Israel's attacks with its missiles and mortar shells target innocent civilians and children, it appears that this doesn't mean anything to the world. As the war on the Lebanese front becomes more fierce, the bloodshed in the Gaza Strip increases by the Israeli war machine, which puts the Strip under the mercy of its tanks and airstrikes. Akram Abu Anud, Palestine TV, Gaza.
تلفزيون فلسطين غزة.
In
Syria, 10 Damascus-based Palestinian factions announced that they are expending all their capabilities and energies to help Hezbollah confront Israel. Factions believe that struggle and perseverance are the only path toward regaining complete national rights, and called for applying pressure on Arabic and Islamic governments. They also formed an emergency committee on the Syrian and Palestinian fronts to support the resistance movement.
A new development has entered the military confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel. The 10 factions of the Damascus-based opposition front announced that they will use up all their capabilities and energies to help Hezbollah confront Israel, after concluding a meeting between the representatives of the Secretary Generals of the factions. The factions include the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad movements.
We are fully prepared to take part in this battle because we feel that it is our duty to defend Lebanon and its sovereignty. Defending Lebanon is the same as defending Palestine. It is a defense of Arab and Muslim dignity. Therefore, we have formed an emergency committee that includes representatives of all Palestinian factions. There will be a multi-level mobilization by the Palestinian factions in order to support the Lebanese people and their valiant resistance.
But the question that poses itself, will a Palestinian participation in this confrontation widen the scope of the war to include Syria, where the leadership of factions such as Islamic Jihad and Hamas are based, especially since Hamas is being held responsible for the kidnapping of an Israeli soldier in Gaza? Israel has never tried to hide the fact that it accuses Syria of harboring those it calls leaders of terrorist organizations. In September 2003, Israel bombed the building of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine in Ain Shihab in Syria. Meanwhile, it is demanding from the Lebanese March 14th coalition, which is opposed to Syria, to disarm the Palestinians in Lebanon, and it is accusing these Palestinian factions of smuggling arms into Lebanon from Syria.
Any talk of smuggling weapons into Lebanon is misleading and not true. Hezbollah said it does not need additional fighters in this battle. It is embarking on this battle very forcefully. But we feel that it is our duty to use all of our capabilities and efforts to help the Lebanese resistance.
In this complicated situation and in the absence of diplomatic solutions, the Palestinians in Lebanon and Syria remain a difficult issue that cannot simply be sidestepped when a war breaks out. No doubt that any talk of a solution to bring about the new Middle East, as Condoleezza Rice pledged, is not possible without overcoming the problem of Palestinian refugees. Without solving the problem of the refugees, the armed resistance and its resolve remain the only choice. The Palestinians' rejection of what they consider a solution in Israel's favor constitutes a victory for the Islamic movement of Hamas, which heads the government, as well as for the Lebanese Hezbollah in its confrontation with Israel.
The Zionist Army, too, has pressed on with its incursion into South Lebanon, killing at least 7 Lebanese civilians by air and artillery strikes. A woman was killed by the explosion of a missed Tyre fired from out at sea. In another development, warplanes killed a man and a woman in the southern Lebanese village of Kafra. A man was killed and 2 civilians were wounded when their car was hit near the Bekaa Valley town of Zanan. Tehran is among those whose house has been reduced to rubble in the explosion.
I'm a doctor, medicine doctor, but now I love Hezbollah. I will fight America with Hezbollah. Night, every time, every moment.
Was it your house?
This is my house, what I have from my house. And democratics, a new Middle East of Mrs. Rice. That's the new Middle East. What Mrs. Rice said to us, new Middle East. That is. The new Middle East without children, without dreams, without emotions, without love. Everything will stay hate for America and Israel, for everybody of us. Say to Mr. Bush, that is the terrorist. I'm the terrorist. I'm a doctor, medicine doctor. I'm a terrorist. Ask him. Please ask him.
Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Zasafi says Washington's support for the Zionist regime of Israel was the reason behind a fruitless conference on Middle East crisis in Rome on Wednesday.
Asafi noted continuation of such a war, masterminded by the United States, would lead to worsening of the crisis, killing of more civilians, and destroying Lebanon and Palestinians' infrastructures. This comes as U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said Thursday she would be happy to return to the Middle East. She had earlier said Washington is against the plan for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East. Meanwhile, anti-war protesters in Kuala Lumpur demanded the United States top diplomat Condoleezza Rice leave the country and described Washington as the greatest sponsor of terrorism. Demonstrators described Rice as a war criminal who had failed to stop the military operations of its ally, the Zionist regime of Israel in Lebanon and the Palestinian territories. The U.S. Secretary of State arrived in Kuala Lumpur Thursday for the ASEAN Regional Forum, which will be hosted by the Association of Southeast Asian Nations on Friday.
About 2,000 Palestinians demonstrated in the West Bank to show support for Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, whose militants have been waging a 2-week battle against the Israeli army. The marchers chanted, "Dear Nasrallah, blow up the Zionist regime," as they waved Lebanese and Hezbollah flags. Dozens of anti-war protesters, meanwhile, picketed the Israeli regime's embassy in Manila on Thursday, waving placards and shouting slogans calling for an end to the Israeli offensive in Lebanon. Some rallies were also held in India, Malaysia, Turkey, Pakistan, Belgium, Lebanon, and Iraq.
قتل 35 شخصا وأصيب أكثر من
35 people were killed and more than 100 others were injured in a series of explosions in the center of the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. The sectarian violence continues, expanding from one Iraqi area to another. Meanwhile, many bodies have been found. They were found with gunshot wounds to the head and signs of torture. The Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki condemned the latest escalation in violence using strong language against what he described as terrorists.
ازدادت في الآونة الأخيرة الانتقادات العراقية خاصة في العاصمة.
Recently, in the capital of Baghdad, Iraqi criticism has increased towards the joint security plan between the American forces and the Iraqi army and police. The attacks and the car bombs have not stopped, thus increasing criticism about how armed groups have gotten used to bombing the center of Baghdad with mortar shells. This is exactly what happened only seconds after a car bomb exploded in the Karada commercial neighborhood. More than 30 people died and dozens of others were wounded. The explosion also caused major damage to surrounding buildings. Despite earlier explosions in the Karada neighborhood, the area had become one of the relatively stable neighborhoods in the capital. It is well protected due to the presence of many checkpoints and an intense deployment of security forces. In a separate incident, armed assailants killed 4 policemen who were on patrol near a mosque in the Mansour neighborhood west of Baghdad. The Interior Minister said that the armed assailants wearing police uniforms kidnapped 17 people from a residential neighborhood in the middle of the day. The situation was not any better in other Iraqi cities. Armed groups assassinated 5 people from the leadership of the dissolved Ba'ath Party in different areas in the city of Diwaniyah. In another incident, unknown assailants launched many bombs on the house of a translator who works for the American forces, destroying the home. The United Nations reports that in the months of May and July, 100 people per day were killed in Iraq due to the violence. The escalation of attacks came after American President George Bush announced that the U.S. will deploy more troops in Baghdad in an attempt to control the deteriorating security situation. Later, before leaving America, the Iraqi Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, informed the U.S. Congress that Iraq will become the gravesite for terrorism and terrorists. But he did not mention the escalation of sectarian violence, which is spreading from one area to the other.
مقبرة الإرهاب والإرهابيين من دون الإشارة إلى تصاعد مسألة العنف الطائفي المتنقل من منطقة إلى أخرى.
إن مصير بلدنا وبلدان العالم.
The fate of our country and the countries of the world are linked together. If we allow democracy to fail in Iraq and terrorism to win, then we will not achieve victory, nor will we ever be victorious in the war against terror in other areas of the world.
When he was sworn into his position 2 months ago, al-Maliki had promised to eliminate the attacks being carried out by armed assailants and to confront sectarian violence. However, these promises have yet to achieve any tangible results. On the contrary, there has been an increase in the intensity of the bloody attacks, as well as the sectarian violence in Iraq.
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Please visit linktv.org/Mosaic for more information about these broadcasters or to view previous Mosaic programs, obtain program transcripts, or receive the weekly Mosaic Intelligence Report. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.